At posterfactory.com.au, we regularly maintain and optimize our printers so images can be predictably and accurately represented in print. The quality of the print is dependent on the quality of the image file that is supplied to us. As a photographer or image creator, you determine the subject, look and feel of your images, and by optimizing your images for print, you will ensure they look great once on display. Here we'll go through some of the basic image editing techniques that will enhance your images. This will not be an extensive list, but a few basic techniques that will improve the printed image quality and address some of the challenges in translating what you see on screen to a great looking print. Let's start with a screen or monitor where you view your images. Please accept that every screen is different. Brightness, contrast and saturation will vary between all screens, even between same make and model. Only consider a screen as one representation of your image. If you make your screen brighter or darker, it does not change the actual image. In general, images viewed on any screen will look brighter than a printed image as they are lit pixels. This is especially so in the shadow or darker areas, so in majority of cases, it is best to assume your print will be darker than what you can see on screen. A monitor can be calibrated so that it displays to a certain standard. Images will look more consistent when viewed on calibrated monitors. However, just because your monitor is calibrated does not mean that your prints will come out looking identical to your screen, as they are two completely different mediums. Computer screens emit RGB lights, while prints reflect available light off the paper with ink. Generally, an LED monitor can have a contrast ratio of about 1 to 1000 or more. The brightest white is 1000 times brighter than the darkest black, where paper typically has a contrast of less than 1 to 100. The tonal range on paper will never come close to what can be seen on screen. What does this mean in practical terms? The details you can see in the shadow areas of your image on screen will be far greater compared to what you will see in print. If your screen can show 10 shades of dark grey in shadows, the printed file would only be able to show 1. If the shadow details are subtle or dark, they will just become black in print. To compensate for this, dark shadows need to be lightened, so when printed, details can still be seen. We profile all our papers for the printers we use so the results are consistent and as accurate as possible. However, the same file will look different when printed on different style papers. Here we have a selection of grayscales printed on various papers to show the difference in contrast, reflection, paper color and texture. Papers have different characteristics, and contrast ratio is just one of them. A paper's texture, reflectivity, base color or white point, and ink absorption will all have impact on how a printed file will look. This cannot ever be accurately simulated on screen. To best compare your image as seen on screen to the final print, you need to view your printed image under adequate lighting. If viewed in a dark room next to a bright monitor, it will always be too dark. Ideally, the color temperature of your viewing lights should match that of your screen. If you have an SLR or mirrorless camera, you will most likely have the option of shooting RAW. A RAW file has more color information than a JPEG, especially in highlights and shadows, and thus is better suited for making image adjustments. If you have a RAW file, we recommend you use it when first editing images. If you only have a JPEG, you can still make a number of adjustments to improve the image, and that we will go over later. In this example for editing RAW files, we will use Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop. Adobe Lightroom has similar functions as may a variety of other software. There are a whole bunch of different editing techniques that can enhance your image, but today we will only cover a few of the basic ones. This is not a comprehensive how-to, but an overview of the basic tools. Correcting image exposure will be the most important element in achieving a good quality print. I will say this again. Correcting image exposure for print is the most important aspect of achieving a good quality print. The vast majority of image correction can be done in the Basic panel. The top right-hand corner of the editing panels, there is a histogram which represents the tonal values in the image. Let us explain the histogram. The histogram is a graph that represents how many of the image pixels are a specific tone between 0, or black, to 255, white. The left of the graph represents the darkest area, and the right of the graph represents the lightest area. If you hover your mouse over the far left of the histograph, it highlights a section called blacks. Moving the cursor slightly to the right, it highlights an area called shadows. Next over is exposure, then highlights, and finally whites. There are corresponding sliders in the Basic tab below that allow you to lighten or darken these specific areas of the image, or you can click and drag to the left or right in the histogram area directly, and the sliders will move accordingly. As a rough guide, the black section affects any areas in the image between 90 and 100% in tone. The shadows affects areas that are between 65 and 90%. The exposure affects area roughly between 35 and 65%. Highlights are the areas between about 10 to 35%, and whites around 0 to 10% in tone. The points where the graph spikes up represents where most of the image's tonal information resides. In this example, there is a spike to the very far left, indicating there is a lot of dark areas, in this case the ground. And there is also a spike to the right of center, showing there is a bit of mid-tones in the sky. If we were to print the file as is, the dark grass at the bottom would print too dark, losing almost all of the details. In this image, we need to lighten the dark areas without affecting the highlights or sky too much. So we'll need to move that spike on the far left a little closer towards the middle, thus lightening the image. However, when drastically lightening shadow areas, noise can be introduced into the image. As seen from the printed grayscale samples, the darkest 10% of the tonal range, from about 90% to 100% black, blend into one tone. To compensate, you will need to lighten most of the shadow detail to lighter than 90%, so you will still see detail in the final print. The shadows may appear a little brighter on screen than you desire, but when printed, they will appear correct. You can always use the drop tool to confirm percentages or density rather than rely solely on screen appearance. Color balance or color temperature allows you to change the warmth of the image. The lower the number, the cooler or more blue the image tone. The higher the number, the warmer or more yellow the image tones become. Adobe Camera Raw and other software packages often have a vibrance and saturation slider. In general, the saturation slider affects all pixels in an image, where the vibrance slider is a little more selective in what colors are affected and by how much. With the vibrance slider, skin tones are generally protected, and it is much harder to push colors out of gamut, that is, further than what we can display in print. The clarity slider increases contrast between edges around objects. The clarity slider helps give contrast between smaller elements of the image, where the regular contrast slider affects overall contrast more. Clarity can be useful for certain subjects like landscapes, but for other subjects may not be as desired. In this case, it helps with the image contrast in the grass and rock textures. Remove chromatic aberrations. These are the edges of purple, green or other color that appear between sky or bright lit areas and darker objects. In this case, between the sky and the rocks. Use profile corrections. It uses lens profiles to correct any known issues such as barrel distortion and vignetting with certain lenses. A comprehensive list of the most common lenses are included. Sharpening can be limited to just main edges by using the masking slider. If you hold down Option on Mac or Alt on PC, you can see the areas in white to which the sharpening will be applied. This way, large flat areas that don't need sharpening won't get noisy or grainy as a result. Noise reduction, used if the image has a large amount of noise or grain. Applying too much will reduce image detail, so don't go overboard. Once these changes are done, you can export a JPEG for print. If wanted, you can open the file in Photoshop for additional editing. For this example, we will edit the JPEG or other files using Adobe Photoshop, but other software packages would have similar or equivalent features that you can use. In Photoshop, there are several ways to achieve a similar result. The best way to achieve the desired outcome may vary on who you ask and the contents of the image. The following methods are simple but effective ways to correct the most common issues. The more recent versions of Photoshop give access to camera raw adjustments, not just for RAW files, but for JPEG or TIFF images as well. Most of the same corrections can be made to JPEG and TIFFs as shown previously. Note that JPEGs don't have the same depth of color information, so you may not be able to recover as many details as with a RAW file. Also, pushing the tonal corrections too far can introduce more noise to the image than what you would get using a RAW file. You can access this feature in Filter, Camera Raw Filter. If using an older version of Photoshop and the Camera Raw feature is not available, another useful tool for lightening shadows is the Shadow and Highlight function. This feature can be found in Image, Adjustments, Shadows, Highlights. With the Show More options checked off, you can lighten the shadows and the highlights using the sliders. For the shadows, the higher the amount, the lighter the darker tones get. For the highlights, the higher the amount, the darker the highlights get. Turn the preview on and off a few times to compare the difference. Don't apply it too much, as the image can get very flat and dull. If you want a little more control, check the Show More Options button. For the shadows, moving the amount slider determines how bright the image gets. The Tone slider determines the range of tones selected. To the left, only the darkest tones are affected. Sliding to the right, lighter areas start to get affected. The radius affects contrast between pixels and details. With the slider to the left, only finer details are affected. As you slide to the right, larger details are affected. The highlight sliders work in the same way, but by darkening highlights. The amount determines how much the highlights are darkened. The tone selects the range, and the smaller the amount, only the lightest tones are affected. The greater the amount, the darker tones become affected. Slider settings are determined by image and personal preference, but it's best not to go overboard. Camera raw adjustments and shadows and highlights are the easiest way to lighten images with dark shadows while protecting the highlights and overall image tone. For general image tone adjustments, where shadows are not overly dark, using curves and levels are a great way to achieve this. Curves or levels can both adjust the tone of an image and both show a histogram for reference. Typically, curves will give greater control to your adjustments, but as they both make similar adjustments, which one you use may be determined by the specific image and personal preference. You can apply both these adjustments either to the image itself or as a layer adjustment. First, look at levels. Go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, or Command L on Mac. Or alternatively, create a levels adjustment layer clicking on the bottom of the Layers panel on the Create New Fill or Adjustment layer and selecting Levels. For this example, we will use an adjustment layer. The benefit of an adjustment layer is it can be modified or deleted, leaving the original image unaltered. You can use one of the presets if you wish, with a list of options from the drop-down menu. You can also use Auto, but this can yield unintended results. If at any time you wish to return to the unchanged state, click on the Revert button at the bottom of the panel. You will notice the image's histogram is in the Input Level slider. There is also an Output Level slider. Moving the Dark Input slider to the right darkens the black point of the image. If you move the black point past the point where the image information begins, any tones to the left of that black point slider will become 100% black, losing image detail. This is also called clipping the black. Midtones can be lightened by sliding the middle gamma slider to the left or darkened by sliding to the right. The input level's white point slider represents the white point or 0% black. Sliding it to the left lightens the image. Any image information to the right of the white point slider will become white. This is also referred to clipping the highlights. To see what areas will be either totally black or totally white, you can hold down the Option key on Mac or Alt on PC as you click on the black point slider. Areas that are total black show as black. Areas that are other colors apart from white are approaching 100% black. The darker the color, the closer to black it is. Option clicking on the white point slider will show areas that are pure white as white. Other colors show areas that are approaching white. Moving the dark output level slider to the right lightens the black point of the image, making what was 100% black grey. Moving the output white point slider to the left darkens the image's white point, so the whitest part of the image will become darker. In Channel, RGB is selected by default, making adjustments to the whole image. You can also select the red, green and blue channels individually and make adjustments to them specifically if wanting to change the hue. Go to Image, Adjustments, Curves, Command-M on Mac or Control-M on PC, or alternatively, create a Curves adjustment layer by clicking on the Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer and selecting Curves. Similar to Levels, the Curves panel also has input and output values. The horizontal plane is the input value, where black to white goes from left to right. The vertical axis is the output value, where black is at the bottom, going to white at the top. By clicking on the diagonal line, dragging up the image is lightened. By dragging down the image is darkened. The place on the line you click determines what tones are mostly affected. Left is dark, right is light. By clicking closer to the left bottom, you are affecting the darker tones. By clicking and dragging the closer to the top right, the lighter areas are affected more. You can select and move multiple points on the line to adjust the tones. To make the image more contrasty, for example, click and drag the left side of the line down, and then click and drag the right side of the line up. This creates what's called an S-curve. It darkens dark areas and lightens lighter areas, giving greater contrast. For the average photo, you don't want too much of the image that is totally black or totally white, but this rule totally depends on the image and the look, feel and mood you want to convey. Isolated objects on white can look great, just as highlights around a dark object. Just remember that image tones between about 90 to 100% will mostly print black, so compensate for that. A quick and simple way to check for the possibility of your shadow area losing detail and printing black is to do a test using levels or curves. In the Adjustment panel, move the Input Black point slider to the right from 0 to 25. 25 is about 90% image tone. While clicking and holding on the slider, keeping it at 25, press Option on Mac or Alt on PC and it will show you the areas that will most likely print 100% black. Don't forget to delete or undo this levels test after viewing. Many images need adjustments to the color. You can do some of this using levels or curves by adjusting one of the red, green or blue values, but a very handy method is hue saturation. Go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. Command U on Mac, Control U on PC. This can also be applied as a layer style by clicking on Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer and selecting Hue Saturation. There are three main sliders in the panel: Hue, Saturation and Lightness. Sliding the hue left or right shifts all the colors in the image one way or the other. The two color bars at the bottom of the panel are a guide to what changes are being made. The top bar is the original setting, and the bar underneath displays your changes. If you push the hue slider all the way to the right, or plus 180, the bottom color bar gives an indication on the color shift. Looking, the very left of the top bar is cyan. The bottom bar is now red. In the middle, the top bar is red, and the bottom bar is now cyan. This shows that the areas of image that were cyan are now red, and that the areas that were red are now cyan. Plus 180 means that the colors have shifted 180 degrees around the color wheel, or are now the opposite. Typically, the hue slider works best when only shifting slightly to the left or the right. The saturation slider either increases saturation to the right or decreases saturation by sliding left. Sliding all the way left turns the image into a grayscale. The lightness slider lightens to white by sliding to the right and turns to black by sliding to the left. You can colorize your image by clicking on the checkbox. This will turn your image to any color that you choose by altering the hue slider. You can also alter the saturation. This is one simple way to create a sepia tone, for example. Check the Colorize button and select an orange hue, and then drag the saturation slider to the left. You can also change the hue and saturation of specific colors. Clicking on the drop-down menu that says Master or All Colors, you will see a list of other primary colors that you can alter. For example, if you select red, you could then change the hue or saturation of all the reds in the image. You can also increase or decrease the range by altering the sliders that appear between the bottom two color bars if you wish. The simplest ways of sharpening your image is to use the Unsharp mask. Go to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp mask. An image that is out of focus and blurry cannot magically be made to look in focus. The Unsharp mask function is more for enhancing. There are three sliders: Amount, Radius, and Threshold. Slider settings are very image and resolution dependent. Settings that may work for one image may not be appropriate for another. Photoshop sharpens the image by looking for pixels that change from a dark color to a lighter color abruptly. This indicates an edge. Sharpening is increasing the contrast between the dark and light pixels. The Amount slider determines how much sharpening you wish to apply, generally avoiding too much over 100%. The Radius slider determines how far from the edge the sharpening gets applied. If the amount is 100% or more, you generally want to keep the radius down at about 1 pixel. Increasing the radius too high in this scenario would create large unsightly halos around objects. The threshold helps to minimize the sharpening to the edges of the image and not apply it to the flat or smooth portions of the image, and increasing the noise. The threshold amount is dependent on how much sharpening is applied. If the threshold is too low, there may be too much image noise as a result. If the threshold is too high, the sharpening effect is reduced. It's best to slowly increase the threshold by tiny increments and turn preview off and on so you can clearly see the changes. Depending on the image, the threshold level may typically be between 0 and 3 or 4. As with most effects, don't go overboard. Over-sharpening can create other image quality issues. There are so many ways you can edit your images. The ones we covered here are just a few of the options to get better looking prints. If you are not sure about your edits, it is always a good idea to run a small test print. There is always something to learn from the process and will make it much easier to achieve print perfection.